Hello, and welcome back to the Diogenes podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Willingham, and together we will chew our way through Wokistan in search of an honest man, or woman, or they, them. I'm just kidding. There's nothing honest about any of that. Remember, if you enjoy the content on the Diogenes podcast, please subscribe and tell your friends to join the pack. Also, remember to leave a like so that we can boost the channel in the suggestions and reach more viewers. I'd like to offer a special thank you to recent subscribers. I really do appreciate your time and attention. Today, we'll continue with my essay in progress and conclude Part 4, Prove Me Wrong, the Assassination of Charlie Kirk, and then move on to Part 5, Danse Macabre. Charlie Kirk was a 31-year-old husband and father of 2 young children, a conservative author, an activist, and an entrepreneur most known for his public debates on hot-button cultural issues. These open, good-faith engagements took place under Kirk's signature banner reading, "Prove Me Wrong." In a devastating moment of fateful irony, Kirk was shot in the throat midway through his response to an audience question regarding mass shootings. This took place at a Turning Point USA event at Utah Valley University in Orem, Utah on September 10th, 2025. The alleged shooter, 22-year-old Tyler Robinson, is a young man from a conservative family who was radicalized by leftist ideology, had a trans lover, and inscribed his shell casings with trans, furry, and anti-fascist slogans. Described by a former high school classmate as the most Reddit kid he ever knew, Robinson seems like a poster child for online brain rot, the paradigmatic, disaffected meme bro whose reason and judgment were corrupted in his digital race to the bottom of the brainstem. Perhaps. But again, whether social media is cause or completion, affirmation or accelerant hardly matters. Leftist ideology is viral and ubiquitous. For those not cognitively inoculated, an immunity harder and harder to obtain given the ideological capture of our education system, arts, and media, it is not a matter of if, but when one is exposed and potentially infected. Another irony, those who scream resistance seldom have any. Maybe it's a cry for help. I will not dwell at length on the sum and substance of Charlie Kirk's views or values, for these reasons. 1. I've not followed his content extensively. I've merely noted it in the passing stream of YouTube commentary and recommendations. Looking a bit more closely in the aftermath of his assassination, what strikes me most is Charlie's skill and general goodwill as a debater, and his inclusive willingness to establish common ground, and failing that, to agree to disagree without animosity. He routinely invited those who disagreed with him to come to the very edge of the stage to make their cases. The next most significant thing I noticed was the dispositional contempt, often bubbling to a frothing rage and devolving to ad hominem hostility, on the part of his interlocutors, most of whom could not muster a coherent argument to save their lives, which may explain their delight in seeing Charlie's taken. Just watch some of these interactions with the sound turned off to see the shockingly stark dichotomy of affect. Then ask yourselves, dear readers and listeners, which person or politic is more hateful? 2. I have a strong dislike for people who preemptively broadcast their disagreement with the views and values of those who are ideologically disfavored, as if they fear social contamination by association and must virtue signal their way out of it before they too are quarantined in the pest tent. It has become too perversely urgent for people to state first what they condemn, not what they condone. It is no longer possible even to appreciate a popular song, a film, a painting, or a novel without a ritualized denouncing of the artist's presumed transgressions against some sacred narrative or protected group. Every instance of attention for a designated apostate of the woke cult must be qualified. I was only looking. I don't agree with them. Don't burn me at the stake too. No one is in 100% agreement with anyone else, and rational people always examine their own priors and revise their positions in response to new information. One crucial part of this comes from listening to those with whom one disagrees. This is not merely intellectually honest, it is ethically necessary. No views are above criticism, but this mawkish qualifying is not only a purity trip, it is a Politburo tactic and a defense mechanism from mindless ideologues, and I reject it utterly. 3. What Charlie Kirk said is less important than how he said it. What is at issue in the wake of his assassination is not the moral or political valence of his views, but his right to speak them and our right to listen and respond in turn, especially if we disagree, which by definition we cannot do if we never hear him in the first place. All democratic rights and values are downstream from free speech, which is why it's the First Amendment. And when expression is chilled by fear of cancellation or fatal retribution, democracy dies. The background factor in the murder of Charlie Kirk is the leftist precept that speech is violence, which, if assumed true, justifies violence as a response to dispreferred speech. The media silence at the execution of Irina Zarutska was sickening. The silence of American colleges and universities after the assassination of Charlie Kirk is terrifying. This is the agora, the marketplace of ideas, and institutions of learning have an obligation to reaffirm their mission and commitment to the free and safe exchange of ideas and opinions without fear of reprisal. This has not happened. On the contrary, teachers across the U.S. have fallen into mass formation schadenfreude because a political opponent had his carotid artery exploded in front of his wife and children and hundreds of students. These are the same teachers and administrators who, after the death of George Floyd, issued holy writ on the inherent racism and white supremacist heritage of our country and threw their support behind fraudulent Marxist organizations like BLM. Merit-based standards in STEM fields have been lowered or eliminated to enforce DEI initiatives and promote ideology over scientific principles, to the point where grants, enrollments, and tenured professorships are being offered exclusively to minority identity candidates. Prerequisites in history departments and classics studies have been jettisoned, seen as discriminatory or irrelevant, and were replaced with mandatory programming on BIPOC and indigenous experiences. These are the same teachers and administrators who put pronouns in bios, use land acknowledgments, create safe spaces with crayons and stuffed animals for college students, and issue trigger warnings before studying Shakespeare. You shall mark many a duteous and knee-crooking knave that, doting on his own obsequious bondage, wears out his time much like his master's ass. That was Iago in Othello, Act 1, Scene 1, for those mind-blind and tongue-tied by whiteness. And they are the same teachers and administrators and librarians who cavil about so-called banned books, while rewriting Roald Dahl stories and getting Dr. Seuss books removed from reprintings because they are quote-unquote hurtful and wrong. With the leftist hysteria and hypocrisy about censorship, it is critical to understand that establishing limits on when and where and to whom certain ideas are conveyed is not the same thing as forbidding them altogether, especially when one can still find the books at public libraries and Barnes & Noble and on Amazon. A guaranteed right of speech does not entail a guaranteed audience. Yes, the graphic novel Genderqueer, which valorizes the mental illness known as gender dysphoria and which illustrates blowjob technique with a strap-on, has been removed from middle school libraries in red states. But then, Hustler magazine can't be found there either. Don't be too sad. Gonzo of the Muppet Babies series on Disney is still gender nonconforming, and the cartoon Dead End Paranormal Park on Netflix has gay, trans, and mixed-race bisexual characters for 7-year-old children to admire and emulate. Incidentally, the creator of this confection, Hamish Steele, responded to a post on X by UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who expressed heartfelt condolences to the family of Charlie Kirk after his gruesome assassination. Steele, in screenshots taken from his now-locked account, replied, quote, "Why the fuck are you even commenting, dickhead? Your sympathy for any of the families affected by your weapons, but a random Nazi gets shot and it's a public statement. You're such a fucking evil shit," end quote. Well, I can see why his speech is still free. The grammar is broken, and his invectives are just so jejune. Who would pay for that? Probably the kids who watch his programming with 1 pound of flesh at a time. Stay tuned. Such acrimonious vulgarities, of course, get to be said by adults. Nevertheless, there just are situational limits to free speech and expression, even beyond the prohibition against falsely yelling fire in a crowded theater, which, it bears mentioning, was an example used by Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes in 1919 to convict a man issuing leaflets to resist the draft during World War I. Sometimes the fire is in the judge's belly, and this is why any abrogation of speech and expression is so controversial. Most reasonable limits will have to do with age, expertise, safety and security, and professional obligations to truth-telling, not with sexual preferences, narcissistic identity claims, or political value sets. And critically, contra conventional wisdom, no one is entitled to their own opinions. They are entitled to what they can successfully argue for, which requires an ability to listen to someone else and tolerance for good faith debate. A sterling example of this is Charlie Kirk's personal message to CNN journalist and self-proclaimed adversary Van Jones, sent literally the day before Kirk was killed. Jones emphasizes that all week long, he and Charlie Kirk were quote-unquote beefing hard, online and on air, when Kirk wrote the following, quote, "Hey Van, I mean it. I'd love to have you on my show to have a respectful conversation about crime and race. I would be a gentleman, as I know you would be as well. We can disagree about the issues agreeably," end quote. Credit to Van Jones for being man enough to share this respectfully, along with his visible remorse for Kirk's vicious assassination. No one wants to be wrong, but the intellectually honest welcome error correction, and if you're right, you shouldn't be afraid of proving it. This is something Charlie Kirk did with aplomb and sought to foster in everyone he engaged with in the marketplace of ideas, whether he agreed with them or not. Now, prove me wrong. Part 5. Danse Macabre, Step by Step. All governments suffer a recurring problem. Power attracts pathological personalities. It is not that power corrupts, but that it is magnetic to the corruptible. Such people have a tendency to become drunk on violence, a condition to which they are quickly addicted. Frank Herbert, Missionaria Protectiva, Chapter House, Dune. With the American left, lies and half-truths repeated ad nauseum authenticate themselves, as Joan Didion once put it. The hateful and mendacious rhetoric promulgated by the left against conservatives and other opponents of woke ideology are an adhan, a Muslim call to prayer for the credulous and radicals alike. The analogy is apt. American schools and universities are effectively madrasas for the inculcation of radical leftist identity politics and their revisionist histories and alternative mythologies. Charismatic politicians in the Democratic Party and their journalistic and podcasting acolytes function as muezzins, calling the woke faith militant to their ritual daily hate. A random sampling includes these following headlines. NBC, Biden blasts MAGA philosophy as semi-fascism. Daily Beast, fuck you, fascist! Charlie Kirk drowned out by protesters on Arizona college visit. The New Republic, what it would look like, American neo-fascism, with a picture of Donald Trump sporting a Hitler mustache. The Nation, the white nationalist-in-chief's return to power, picture of Trump. The New Yorker, an untitled cover cartoon depicting Trump in a black boat inflating a white KKK hood sail with his breath. Chicago Tribune, MAGA morphs into Make America Cruel Again. Salon, a prehistory of MAGA. Mainstream conservatives never really purged the fascists. The New York Times, the unreal spectacle of Trump's authoritarianism. The Washington Post, fearing Trump, academics worldwide issue anti-fascist manifesto. Vox, when Trump tells you he's an authoritarian, believe him. NPR, is this the moment when America tips into authoritarianism? Rolling Stone, Nazis want to turn New England into a white ethno-state. Jesus, I hope I can get tickets to that one. But of course, No such like could play any role in the acts of violence against conservative or non-woke activists, or the attempted assassinations on Trump, or the successful one on Charlie Kirk. Violating Aristotle's law of non-contradiction, the left claim that speech is violence and that silence is violence. This voids any hope of ever bridging the moralization gap, the tendency to overstate the harm caused by someone else while minimizing the damage done by oneself. The left thus set a trap guaranteeing that whatever one says or fails to say at the appropriate time is tantamount to an assault. I submit that this is deliberate. Refusing neopronouns or dead-naming is transgenocide for the left, while they're calling a political opponent in 21st century America a Nazi or a fascist or a white supremacist is a righteous stand for social justice. And if that person happens to be murdered by a radicalized kid high on identitarian agitprop, well, they were asking for it, short skirt, white hood, or no. As for the dramatic rise in violence and murder committed by trans activists and groups like Trantifa, who are putting up graphic hit lists of human targets like journalist Andy Ngo on street poles in Portland, Oregon, the less said the better. Just try a basic Google search to find reporting of this escalating phenomenon, which Ngo has documented extensively on his Substack and YouTube channel. The first 25 hits on Google, including the AI synopsis, claim that misinformation is used to incite violence against transgender people. Transgender people are disproportionately targeted. Hate speech translates to real-world harm, except when deployed by leftists. More on this to come. False claims are part of coordinated attacks against leftists and transgenders. Notice again the double standard. Non-woke political criticism, or just the mere reporting of facts, is hate speech, which equals harm. But the left literally get away with murder by dehumanizing their political opponents, and they achieve this systematically through control of the media and academia. One of Hannah Arendt's great insights in her crucial exposition, The Origins of Totalitarianism, was that authoritarian elites gain and maintain control by turning statements of fact into questions of motive. Convince people that some heterodox faction has ill intent and you have a common enemy. According to Wired, NPR, Rolling Stone, Politico, The New Republic, Mother Jones, and the New York Times, etc., it is the trans community who are at mortal risk, while they, in fact, are committing assaults and murders and literally putting up kill lists. There are multiple videos on TikTok of Jeffrey Marsh and other trans activists cocking guns and openly threatening violence with complete impunity, yet stating the obvious fact that men cannot become women and should stay out of women's sports and spaces is somehow the real danger. Tell that to the wife and children of Charlie Kirk, who saw him remorselessly gunned down mid-response to an audience question about the number of trans mass shooters in the last 10 years. Charlie's was the right answer. Too many. Controlling the framing is a strategy at which the left have been exceptionally successful, especially in their long march through the institutions of academia and the news media. Descendants of French theorist Michel Foucault, the left don't so much deny the possibility of truth as they see it as ultimately relative and is inextricable from cultural power structures and identity claims. This is convenient when they happen to control those structures and the means of defeasibility and error correction in public and political discourse. The left are then free to issue their apodictic claims without being answerable for their validity. This is where things take a difficult turn. I am a visual artist, a writer, and a former humanities professor. I would call myself a free speech absolutist if anything could indeed be completely free or absolute. But, as the economist Thomas Sowell has been at pains to point out, there are no perfect solutions, only trade-offs. And as with the right to publish content, not entailing carte blanche to distribute it to everyone everywhere all the time, without regard to its effects, freedom of speech does not entail freedom from consequences for acts of expression which are duplicitous, libelous, treasonous, or which shade into priming or incitement. The risk, as Jonathan Gottschall, author of The Story Paradox, observes, is that, quote, the story is a mercenary that sells itself as eagerly to the bad guys as the good. A story is always an artificial post hoc fabrication with dubious correspondence to the past. So whenever we encounter a highly grammatical story of villains and heroes, evil and good, we should be on guard." End quote. This, of course, includes what I am writing here. I am far from infallible, although I try to be as deeply informed as possible before I speak or write. I am not an expert on everything I discuss, although I am educated and strive to think critically about matters under consideration, and I will seek new information from a range of sources, examine my priors, and change my position as facts and truth require. I am not absent bias, although I value intellectual honesty and epistemic integrity in pursuit of the true and the good wherever they can be found. And unlike the pusillanimous Malcolm Gladwell, whose quote-unquote marquee apology over his former position on men and women's sports provided a decency boost when he confessed that he had been, quote, dishonest in an objective way, end quote, I will not equivocate, attempt to save face, or perform obsequious acts of public contrition to salvage my career. And then again, I don't have one, so that part's easy. Gladwell's is a vital example of the necessity of epistemic good faith. Acknowledging that he knew the fact that men have an unfair biological advantage over women in sport, yet was cowed into silence on the issue, demonstrates that he does not see journalism as truth-seeking, but as a means to career building. His reputation and paychecks came first. He didn't apologize for the sake of the truth. He plea bargained because widening cracks in the woke matrix left him exposed. Additionally, one needs to understand the difference between argument, where the goal is to win, satire, where the goal is to mock, and dialectic, the goal of which is viewpoint synthesis or compromise. All of these have epistemic and ethical merit, although they are methodologically distinct. And it is essential to distinguish between these and the casuistic incontinence of propagandists, whose goal is to control discourse to secure power for their own party, often by deliberately converting signal into noise, or qualifying facts on the basis of motivations, as Hannah Arendt warned. The presumption of mind reading inevitably leads to accusations of thought crime. Democracy proceeds by dialogue, not the heckler's veto drowning out dispreferred speech, nor the capricious silencing of ideological opposition or competing value sets. As Jonathan Rauch noted in The Constitution of Knowledge, quote, the Constitution of Knowledge forces epistemic factions and their beliefs into non-stop negotiations, requiring multiple factions to agree in order to make knowledge. You cannot silence others, no final say, or dominate them, no personal authority, end quote. This is why I don't want Jimmy Kimmel fired, because he falsely claimed that Charlie Kirk's assassin is MAGA, all evidence to the contrary. I want Kimmel fired because his employers told him to apologize for spreading disinformation and failing properly to represent their brand, and he refused, again, placing personal gain ahead of the truth. That and because Kimmel's an unfunny comedian. But this is a professional, not a political matter, and his employer alone gets to decide if he's doing what the job requires. The FCC getting involved is definitely governmental overreach. People must be free to be wrong and even free to be assholes, both within reasonable limits. If challenging speech is not protected, neither is the truth. With teachers losing their jobs for celebrating Charlie Kirk's political assassination, the transgression is more obvious. Educators, especially of young children, have a paramount responsibility to model ethical behavior and critical thinking. It is the foundation of pedagogy. Of course, teachers are people and free to have their own views and biases, but the manner of their expression is necessarily delimited by the precepts of their professional roles, which don't end with the dismissal bell. Teachers are in loco parentis, in place of the parent, and professors are expected to be paragons of reason, not pyroclastic flows of emotional reaction. For teachers of children to publicly express sadistic joy and make revolting gun-to-the-throat gestures at rallies and on social media is sociopathic, full stop. These people have no more business near children than pedophiles do. As for professors, While an analysis of opinions and preferences identified as such may be acceptable subjects for dispassionate and dialectical academic discourse, since when is "I like murder, especially of those who disagree with me" an example of Socratic method or Hegelian dialectic? Such values are clearly in conflict with the academic mission and the social contract between educators, students, and their families, especially when people are assassinated on college campuses in front of students and their families for doing exactly what students and teachers are supposed to do. And such values are clearly in conflict with the tenets of liberalism. Just consider that some of the same people appropriately outraged at the horror of Sandy Hook now openly celebrate the death of Charlie Kirk to see just how grotesque and unacceptable this is. Of course, the real challenge is determining where to draw the line between speech which is disagreeable and speech which contributes to harm. Steven Pinker, a stalwart defender of free speech, acknowledges that this is difficult but necessary. Quote, "We carve out exceptions for fraud, libel, distortion, divulging military secrets, and incitement to imminent lawless action. But these exceptions must be strictly delineated and individually justified. They are not excuses to treat speech as one fungible good among many." End quote. This requires understanding that it is not speech per se, but the ideas articulated and the likely or resulting downstream actions of individuals or policies of political parties with which we should be most concerned, most especially when they deviate from facts, common knowledge, and the social contract. In this sense, individual acts of expression send crucial signals about any actual threats we face from bad actors. Shutting them up won't stop them. It will make it harder to spot them and harder to counter their effects. If the risk is that credulous or unstable people can be swayed by hate speech, and I would argue that they can, the potential gain is that they may be dissuaded by effective counterarguments or at least halted at the ballot box. Speech could lead to violence, but it also could lead to de-escalation through dialogue. This, of course, assumes that we are dealing with rational actors, which I will soon contend we are not, and solving for speech won't solve for that problem. Broadly speaking, the best solution to bad or wrong speech is more and better speech, optimized by the conditions of its presentation and open to rejoinder. The words of the prophets may be written on the subway walls, but who's going to suffer the stench of urine to read them or risk being pushed off the platform into an oncoming train? It is when the ultra-crepidarians of any radical faction dispense with the means of error correction and privilege ideology over inquiry that freedom of speech ceases to be a tool and becomes a weapon. As philosopher Peter Boghossian put it in his book, How to Have Impossible Conversations, co-authored with James Lindsay, quote, "Seemingly impossible conversations typically have one thing in common. They're about moral beliefs rooted in one's sense of identity, but they play out on the level of facts, or assertions, name-calling, grandstanding, threats, etc. The discussion appears to be about issues, ideas, and facts, but instead it's really about the type of person the entrenched individual perceives herself to be. The most difficult conversations, then, masquerade as discussions about something other than morality, but they are actually about what qualities of beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors individuals believe make them good people or bad people, and why it is important to hold the right views among those." End quote. Our entire political ecosystem has collapsed on this point. Every discussion is now a political litmus test, and every social interaction is an identitarian flex. Every event, a Seussian sorting of sneetches with stars from the ones we like less with none upon thars. And in the end, we all fall down from this terpsichorean disorder, flailing in place to the dull, repetitive drumbeats of the death drive. Speaking of two left feet, the Danse Macabre performed by the cluster B cultists of the American left streams in an endless torrent on legacy media, TikTok, and other platforms. The murder of Charlie Kirk, music to their ears. Do the hustle. Joshua Slocum, host of the trenchant Disaffected podcast, my personal favorite, describes these so-called Manson family values. Josh says, quote, There's plenty of psychopathy on display in American life today, and we've got a bumper crop among our politicians and our media figures. We're all Manson girls now. Back in the 1970s, when people saw the Manson girls singing and smiling on their way into the courtroom for their murders, the entire American public was jaw-droppingly shocked. But today, we treat the same kind of frankly expressed evil that the Manson girls did as if it were absolutely normal. Countless thousands of people, mostly young, but some older, and all Democrats and leftists, cheered for the murder of Charlie Kirk on September 10, 2025. We've never seen anything like it. Mostly young women took to social media to giggle, pout, simper, cheer, and blow kisses at the murderer while mocking Charlie Kirk in his death and sadistically tormenting his widow and children by making fun of them." End quote. This is not hyperbole. I've watched scores of clips and posts from TikTok, Facebook, X, Blue Sky, etc., and it is sickening. Slocum introduces his episode with reference to a profound work by the Polish psychiatrist Andrew Lobaczewski. By sheer coincidence, I had just recently begun reading this when Josh's episode first aired. Researched and written in secret at great personal risk, which some of his colleagues did not survive, first under Nazi occupation, then under the communists, the book, Political Ponerology, represents a thoroughgoing scientific analysis of evil, psychopathy, and the origins of totalitarianism. Lobaczewski warns the West that we are not immune to authoritarian evil. His work is a comprehensive examination of the symptoms and consequences of pathocracy, ruled by the psychologically disturbed. He observes that certain quote-unquote characteropathic personalities, narcissists and psychopaths, are especially drawn to positions of power and social influence in which their pathological symptoms often confer charismatic and manipulative advantage. Such characteropaths play a critical role in the formation of pathocracies because, quote, their activities as fanatical leaders or spellbinders in various ideologies open the door to psychopathic individuals and the vision of the world they want to impose, end quote. He describes how such individuals attract similar characteropaths, but also infect others by persuading them to, quote, adopt ideologies created by doctrinaire, often schizoidal people, recast them into an active propaganda form, and disseminate them with their characteristic pathological egotism and paranoid intolerance for any philosophies which may differ from their own, end quote. These ideologies undergo further permutation, becoming increasingly pathological as their dissemination is activated at a macrosocial level. Quote, if such a movement triumphs by revolutionary means and in the name of slogans of freedom, the welfare of the people, social justice, and internationalism, this only brings about further transformation of the governmental system thus created into a macrosocial pathological phenomenon. Within this system, the common man is blamed for not having been born a psychopath and is considered good for nothing except hard work, fighting, and dying to protect a system of government he can neither sufficiently comprehend nor ever consider to be his own, end quote. Never consider to be his own. Precisely the sentiment conveyed by comedian and political talk show host Jon Stewart in a recent unhinged rant at Republicans. Quote, you just want that person to give you your country back because you feel that you're this country's rightful owners. There's only one problem with that. This country isn't yours. You don't own it. It never was. There is no real America. This is followed by thunderous applause. You don't own it. You don't own patriotism. You don't own Christianity. Going into sky-high moral dudgeon here. You sure as hell don't own respect for the bravery and sacrifice of military, police, and firefighters. End quote. Notice the totalizing, entropic language, the politics of negation, isn't, don't, never. There is no country, no reality, no commitment, no spirit, no virtue. Only hell is a sure thing. This is gaslighting on a metaphysical scale, an existential assault on reality and on those who insist that there remains such a thing outside the ideological silos of the hyper-tribal left. This is pathocracy in action, and it is produced by those who continue to control the sense-making and truth-seeking institutions of the West, the woke, the whole woke, and nothing but the woke. The revealed wisdom of the American left, as with other cults, is eschatological. It is about the death, judgment, and the destiny of humanity. So the Danse Macabre is really a ghost dance. Do you dare to follow in their footsteps, dear readers and listeners?